Between 1941 and 1945, American factories produced roughly 88,000 tanks. Germany, with its legendary Tigers and Panthers, built around 49,000. By 1944, the United States was building more tanks in a single month than Germany built in an entire year. The Americans didn't design the best tanks. They designed tanks that could be built fast, maintained easily, and replaced quickly. A single German Tiger cost 250,000 Reichsmarks, roughly $100,000. An American Sherman cost a fraction of that. Where Germany chose quality, America chose quantity. Where Germany built engineering masterpieces, America built good enough workhorses. This is the story of every American tank used in World War II, and how mass production defeated precision engineering. The British tankers in North Africa called it honey, not because it was sweet, but because in the desert where every other tank broke down constantly, the American M3 Stuart just kept running. 22,744 Stuarts were built between 1941 and 1945, the most produced light tank in history. The British loved them, but affection doesn't win tank battles. The M3 Stuart entered service in 1941 with a 37mm gun and a top speed of 36 miles per hour. In the North African desert, where British tanks overheated and seized up, the Stuart's reliability was a godsend. But reliability couldn't solve the gun problem. By 1942, that 37mm was hopelessly outmatched. It could handle reconnaissance. It could support infantry. Against German tanks, it was a pea shooter. In 1942, the Army tried to fix this with the M5 Stuart, same 37mm gun, but with twin Cadillac V8 automobile engines and an automatic hydromatic transmission. The M5 was quieter, cooler, and roomier than the M3. Crews loved the automatic transmission. Drivers who'd never operated a manual gearbox under fire could now focus on not getting killed instead of not stalling the engine. But it still couldn't penetrate German armor. In the Pacific, where Japanese tanks were even more lightly armored, the Stuart was actually effective. But in Europe, by mid-war, it had been relegated to scouting missions. Fast enough to spot the enemy, too weak to fight them. The Americans built over 22,000 Stuarts. The British loved them. American crews appreciated their reliability. But affection doesn't win tank battles. And neither does dependability when your gun bounces off enemy armor. The Stuart was the honey that couldn't sting hard enough. The fall of France in May 1940 revealed a brutal truth. America's tank force was completely inadequate. The M2 medium tank was obsolete before it even entered production. The US needed a tank with a 75mm gun immediately, but there wasn't time to design a proper rotating turret for it, so they improvised. They mounted the 75mm gun in a sponson on the right side of the hull, giving it only 15 degrees of traverse. They stuck a 37mm gun in a small turret on top. The result was 10 feet tall, riveted together, and looked like someone had stacked two tanks on top of each other. Production began in March 1941. By December 1942, when it was cancelled, 6 had been built. The British called their version the Grant, after Ulysses S. Grant. The Americans called theirs the Lee, after Robert E. Lee. Both versions had the same fundamental problem. To aim the main gun, you had to aim the entire tank. And at 10 feet tall, the M3 was a target that couldn't hide. But in May 1942, at the Battle of Gazala in North Africa, British crews discovered something remarkable. The 75mm gun could actually penetrate German tank armor at range, the first Allied tank gun that could do so. British tankers who'd been fighting Rommel with 2-pounder guns that barely scratched German armor suddenly had a weapon that could kill panzers at 1,000 meters. For a few months, the M3 gave the British a fighting chance against Rommel's Afrika Korps. The Soviets, receiving M3s through Lend-Lease, were less impressed. They called it the collective grave for 6 people. The tall silhouette, limited gun traverse, and weak side armor made it a death trap on the Eastern Front. By October 1942, the M4 Sherman was arriving in North Africa. The M3 was obsolete within a year of entering combat. It was the wrong tank at the right time, desperately flawed, but available when nothing else was. 49 through 324 produced. 11 different plants. The M4 Sherman was mass production at its finest. The Sherman entered combat in North Africa in October 1942 with a 75mm gun in a fully rotating turret, 33 tons of weight, and a top speed of around 25-30 miles per hour. Its frontal armor ranged from 51 mm to 100 mm, depending on the variant. 5 crew members operated each tank: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver. It wasn't better than German tanks. The 75mm gun could penetrate a Panzer IV, but bounced off Tigers and Panthers. The armor was thinner than German heavy tanks, and it had one notorious weakness: it caught fire easily when penetrated. The British called it the Ronson, after a cigarette lighter whose advertising slogan was, "Lights the first time, every time." The Germans called it the Tommy Cooker, American crews in the Pacific, where Shermans were often fitted with flamethrowers, called it the Zippo. A British operational research study in Normandy from June to July 1944 found that 82% of Shermans burned when penetrated. That sounds catastrophic. But the same study found that 80% of Panzer IVs burned when hit, and even the Panther burned 63% of the time. Every tank was a death trap when the armor failed. What the Sherman had was reliability. Crews could repair them in the field without waiting for specialized mechanics. Sherman mechanics could swap an engine in 6 hours. Panther mechanics needed 3 days. Shermans used less fuel than German tanks. They were simple enough that replacement crews needed only days of training instead of weeks, and there were always more of them. When Germany launched the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, German Panthers and Tigers ran out of fuel and broke down while American Shermans kept rolling. One Sherman battalion fought for 183 consecutive days. The 761st Tank Battalion, the first African-American armored unit in combat, landed in France in October 1944 with 54 Shermans. Before their first battle, General Patton told them, "I don't care what color you are so long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches." They did. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers fought with a shattered leg, refused evacuation, and kept his Sherman in action until he was killed on November 19th. The 761st lost 36 men in combat. 22 died in November alone. They earned 11 Silver Stars, 69 Bronze Stars, and about 300 Purple Hearts. One crew member later said, "The inside of a tank is a hell of a place to be when red-hot steel fragments are ricocheting around, and there's nowhere else to go." On December 26th, an M4A3E2 jumbo Sherman named Cobra King fought through the village of Assiniboia. Lieutenant Charles Boggess commanded. His tank had extra armor welded on, slower than a standard Sherman, but better protected. At 4:50 p.m., Cobra King broke through to the besieged 101st Airborne at Bastogne. A paratrooper approached the tank cautiously, stuck out his hand, and said simply, "Glad to see you." Late-war Shermans got the 76 mm gun starting in July 1944, which could finally compete with German armor at range. The M4A3E8 Easy 8 added improved horizontal volet spring suspension. But for most of the war, Sherman crews knew they were outgunned. The Sherman caught fire. It got penetrated. Sherman crews knew the statistics. 82% burned when penetrated. They knew they were outgunned. A Sherman tank commander later wrote, "We were told it took 5 Shermans to knock out a Panther. The math was simple. We'd lose 4 tanks and 4 crews to get one of theirs. We just hoped we weren't in one of the 4. They kept fighting anyway, because for every Sherman destroyed, 3 more rolled off American assembly lines. 49th out of 324 of them proved that quantity has a quality all its own." In April 1944, American factories started producing a genuinely excellent light tank. The M24 Chaffee mounted a lightweight 75mm gun adapted from the B-25 bomber, rode on modern torsion bar suspensions similar to German designs, and could hit 35 miles per hour while weighing only 18.4 tons. The first 34 M24s reached Europe in November 1944. They were issued to the 2nd Cavalry Group and rushed to the Battle of the Bulge in December. Crews who had been stuck in M5 Stuarts with 37mm pop guns couldn't believe the difference. The 75mm could actually kill German tanks. One tank commander reported engaging a Panzer IV at 200 yards. The M24 got off the first rounds, hitting the Mark IV on the front. "We could finally fight back." But reports from the front were overwhelmingly positive too late. By the time the war ended in May 1945, only 4,731 had been produced. Most never reached frontline units. Many armored divisions were still equipped with Stuarts when Germany surrendered. The 7th Armored Division had just 28 operational Chafees by June 1945. One crew member later recalled, "We got the Chaffee in April 45. The war ended a month later. We spent 2 years getting shot at in Stuarts, then finally got a tank that could fight just in time for it not to matter." The M24 went on to serve in Korea, Vietnam, and with dozens of countries well into the 1990s. Some were still fighting in the 1990s with armies that couldn't afford newer designs. It was genuinely good. It just arrived 3 years too late to matter in World War II. The light tank that could have made a difference from 1942 onwards didn't enter combat until the war was almost won. Cologne, Germany, March 6, 1945. The 3rd Armored Division was fighting street by street into the ancient city. Most of it was rubble, 85% destroyed by Allied bombing, but the massive Gothic cathedral still stood, rising into the smoke-filled sky like a ghost from another world. Near an intersection in front of the cathedral, a German Panther tank waited in ambush, concealed behind debris. 2 M4 Shermans rolled into the intersection. The Panther's 75mm gun fired. The first Sherman erupted in flames. The 2nd tank commander saw the flash, tried to reverse, but the Panther's 2nd shot blew off his tracks. The crew bailed out and ran. The Sherman sat there, helpless, waiting for the killing shot. The Panther's crew held fire. They were waiting for the next victim. What came next wasn't another Sherman. It was M26 Pershing number Eagle 7, one of only 20 Pershing heavy tanks that had reached Europe just weeks earlier. Staff Sergeant Robert Early commanded from the turret. Corporal Clarence Smoyer sat in the gunner's seat, eye pressed to the periscope. The driver inched the Pershing forward from a side street. Through his vision block, he spotted the Panthers' long gun barrel swinging toward them. "Traverse left!" Early shouted. It was a race to fire first. Whoever got their shot off would live. The other would burn. Smoyer's sight settled on the Panther's frontal armor. He fired. The 90mm armor-piercing round punched through the Panther's glacis plate. The German tank didn't return fire. It didn't move. Smoke began pouring from the hatches. An Army cameraman named Jim Bates captured the entire duel on film, making it one of the most famous tank engagements of World War II. The M26 Pershing was America's answer to the Tiger and Panther, 46 tons of armor, a 90mm gun comparable to the German 88 mm, and a 100 pounders of frontal protection. It cost 81,324 per tank. Development had started in May 1943, but Army ground forces opposed it, believing the Sherman was adequate. The debate dragged on for months. After the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 proved otherwise, Sherman losses mounted. Against concentrated German armor, the Army rushed Pershings to Europe. The first 10 were produced in November 1944, 30 more in December, 70 in January 1945. By the time production ramped up in February and March, the war was nearly over. Only 20 made it to combat before VE Day. By the end of 1945, around 2,200 Pershings had been produced. They served with distinction in Korea, where they proved superior to Soviet T-34s. But in World War II, they were a vindication that arrived too late. America finally had a tank that could go toe-to-toe with German heavy armor after the war was already won. The Americans built 88,000 tanks in World War II. The Germans built 49,000. That difference won the war. But those numbers represent something else. American tank crews suffered over 700 killed in action in Europe alone. The 3rd Armored Division, the one that fought at Cologne, started the Normandy campaign with 232 Shermans. Over the next 11 months, they lost 648 tanks destroyed in combat and another 700 knocked out and repaired, a cumulative loss rate of 580%. Sherman crews died at horrifying rates, knowing their tanks were outmatched, but kept climbing into them anyway because there were always more Shermans. American tanks weren't sophisticated. The Stuart had a 37mm pea shooter. The Lee was 10 feet tall with a gun that couldn't traverse. The Sherman caught fire when hit, and everyone knew it. The Chaffee arrived in 1944 when it was needed in 1941. The Pershing came in 1945 when it should have been there in 1943. But by 1944, American factories were producing more tanks every month than Germany produced all year. When a Sherman burned, 2 more took its place. When crews died, replacements arrived within days. When tanks were destroyed, assembly lines built more overnight. German tanks were better. American production lines were unstoppable. Quality versus quantity. Precision engineering versus mass production. The Tiger was superior to the Sherman in every measurable way. But for every Tiger Germany built, America built 37 Shermans. The math was simple. The human cost was staggering. The outcome was inevitable. The Americans didn't win with the best tanks. They won with enough tanks and enough men willing to crew them. Subscribe for more exciting videos like this and share your thoughts in the comments.